There's a core symptom of trauma that most people don't know about. It's very strong and it can be very limiting for your life. It's not only associated with trauma, but it's almost universal in people who were traumatized as children. And it drives virtually every other trauma symptom, meaning until you've learned to identify and heal it, it's hard to change the other symptoms. And yet you may never have heard of this. It's called neurological dysregulation. And when you know about it, the possibility of healing and changing your life go way up. Not knowing about it is a big reason why people who grew up with neglect and abuse struggle to progress in their healing. Now, this is because what everyone used to believe is that trauma wounds were largely psychological. The problem was emotional, behavioral, maybe cultural. And trauma wounds are definitely partly those things. But we now know that the primary injury is neurological. That means it's in your nervous system. So how does that work? Early trauma dysregulates the brain and nervous system, potentially triggering a whole range of problems from obesity to ADHD to heart disease to addiction. And those are problems that they could happen to anyone, but they're much more common in traumatized people. It's more than that, though. For people with childhood PTSD, just being dysregulated is a problem, and it makes ordinary things in your life ridiculously hard. Things like reading a book, spending time alone, getting somewhere on time, expressing an opinion, or dealing with feeling left out. All these things can set off dysregulation. If you could see an MRI image of a brain in this dysregulated state, you'd see the front left cortex go dim and inactive, and that hampers the ability to reason and pay attention. You'd see the right front cortex flaring wildly, and that's a flood of emotions. So you have suppressed reasoning, overreactive emotions, and then it gets hard to process emotions and thoughts. So what happens is you start to feel overwhelmed. It is just building up in there. Do you ever experience that? It's not just an emotional reaction, it turns out. It's in your brain. So there's this change of activity. Brain waves are irregular, breathing and heart rate become irregular and out of sync. And there may be numbness in your hands. These are some of the symptoms you can feel. Numb in the face, a feeling of clumsiness in your feet. It can be hard to find words or complete tasks or pay attention. When I'm dysregulated, I get clumsy and trip on curbs and drop things. My handwriting changes. For a lot of us, we say things we don't mean when we're dysregulating. We do things that we regret later, almost as if we were half conscious in that moment, and we lacked the clear thinking to say no or do the right thing. Or we may grow silent and withdrawn, or we may feel desperate and act impulsively, or fly into a rage and lash out. After that kind of outburst, we may feel almost no emotion. And then what would be worse is what happens sometimes is we behave coldly to the people we've just hurt. Our affect is flat. My friend told me that when I'm upset, I have a flat affect. That's a blank expression on my face. And so it's impossible to tell from the outside what I'm feeling. I look like I don't care. When somebody tells me something like, Anna, something terrible has happened, I just go, oh. They think I don't care, but I do care. Maybe I care too much, in fact. When I'm really, really hurt or mortified, my face will stop showing what I'm feeling. Do you have any of this? It can make it so hard to connect or solve problems with people. But here's the thing. These reactions are not happening because I'm bad or anybody's bad or you're bad or selfish or weak. These reactions are happening, or they're made worse, because the brain is dysregulated. Nobody knew this before, not doctors, not therapists, nobody knew, but now we know. Now, for better and worse, people usually can't tell you're dysregulated by looking at you, which can be good because sometimes that's just a private thing. You want to look like you have it together. But on the other hand, when people can't see what's going on with you, you can end up getting into the habit of hiding how you really feel, where you're in this dance where people assume you're okay, you pretend you're okay. Actually, you're feeling disconnected and uncomfortable, and you're not going to have a chance to talk to them about it. Have you ever had to think really hard about how to hold your face in a weird situation so it looks like you're having the appropriate response to whatever the other person is saying? Because when you're dysregulated, it's hard to even hear what they're saying, let alone think of how you're supposed to act. Dysregulation gets activated when you're confronted with stressors and crises. And remember, it can suppress your ability to reason while it amps up your emotions. So you see how this explains so much, why those of us with childhood PTSD appear to keep making the same bad choices over and over, even when we say we're never going to do it again. And we do mean we're never going to do it again. But then you look around and there you are, you're doing it again. So I'm here to tell you, you can break this cycle. You really are capable of making good choices and good changes. And it gets way easier when you learn to re-regulate. So how do you know when dysregulation is happening? Let's start with the regulated state and what that feels like. When you're calm, brain activity is even and it's driving body responses and emotions in an even and predictable way. But when strong emotions trigger dysregulation, it can feel like a bad chemical just started running through your body. And I've noticed it feels a little bit like a migraine coming on. If you get migraines, there's a moment where you know it's coming and it's too late to turn back. Dysregulation is like that. Or sometimes it feels like I've never had a seizure, but it's what I imagine a seizure feels like right before it starts, like something is starting to rise up in your nervous system and it's getting ready to kind of take over. Your thinking changes and you can go into reactivity. You might withdraw and go silent or get confused and blurt things out or panic. And it's hard to perceive accurately what's going on in those moments, like, wait a minute, what just happened? And you might totally misread whether another person is angry or not, or dangerous or safe, and you can't tell whether your words and actions are appropriate to the situation. And sometimes you don't get perspective on what was really happening until days later. So the trick to noticing dysregulation is to recognize the signs, and they might be a little different in different people. So here are some clues. You feel spaced out. You're at a loss for words. You can't remember where you are. You feel scattered. You're trying to do a lot of things at once, but you're finishing nothing. You're tripping over things, dropping things, losing things, your keys, your purse. Your voice and facial expression go flat, or you're in a rage, or you feel a huge urgency to express what is bothering you. You can't feel parts of your body. You can't feel hands, mouth, face, nose, feet, for example. And dysregulation often begins with a flood of emotion. You get very upset or scared from something that's said or something that happens. But sometimes the trigger isn't anything that you notice. It could be your hormones or a feeling of exhaustion or just waking up in the morning. That could set it off. Setting off, by the way, that's what we call a trigger. And we're not using trigger in the common sense of the word that a lot of people use for upset. I'm talking about something that happens that sets off neurological dysregulation. You can see why it's hard to control your dysregulation at first. So that's what it's like to be dysregulated. The most important question is, what can you do to re-regulate as quickly as possible and stay regulated? So first, notice you're dysregulated. If you can do this one thing, you can control your negative impulses and give yourself the time and space to re-regulate before you begin saying anything or doing anything that could be destructive. Are you flooding with emotion? Are you going numb? Say to yourself, I'm getting dysregulated. Number 2, be safe. This is not a good time to drive a car. You should pull over. I'm serious. And take your time. Don't go running into a crosswalk or try to use heavy equipment. Give all your focus to getting yourself into a physically safe place where you can pause and re-regulate. Number 3, if you are threatened with violence, some of this is not going to apply. So just return all your focus to getting yourself into a physically safe place, whatever it takes. Number 4, if what triggered you was an argument, instead of escalating the fight, you can use gentle words to stop the interaction, at least temporarily. Like you can say, I want to continue this conversation, but I need to take a breather to calm down. Or if you don't want to tell the other person that you're triggered, tell them you need a bathroom break. Or if you're on the phone, say you have a call on the other line, and then call them back later. when you need to step back from a situation, you don't have to get into a big discussion about it. Because remember, talking about it can actually make dysregulation worse. So just find a way to put the conversation on pause. Number 6, then buy some time. Separate from the other person if you can. Go to a room by yourself. Even if it's the bathroom or a car, no one has to know what you're doing. If it feels urgent to express yourself, maybe you want to lash out, take even longer before you try to resolve anything. Number 7 is a quick technique. Stamp your feet on the floor. You'd be amazed how helpful it is to bring yourself back into present time, into your body. And as you stamp each foot, you can say quietly to yourself, right, left, right, left. And this helps your brain begin to re-regulate. Number 8 is take 10 deep breaths, focusing on the out breath, if you like. Some people say that's more relaxing and engages the parasympathetic nervous system. Number 9, another measure that you can take that no one knows you're doing is you can press your tongue to the back of your teeth, like that. It just, again, it helps you get into your body. Along the same lines, you can sit down and feel the weight of your butt in the chair. This is one more way to get back inside your body. So 11 is sometimes what you need is something to eat. When you're stressed, you'll probably crave carbohydrates and sugar, but it's protein foods that will help you get grounded again. Drink some water. Number 12, if you need some comfort, you can wash your hands and feel the water and soap on your hands. Warm water is extra calming. 13 is, if you have a trusty friend with you, you can get a good squeezing hug. It can really help re-regulate your brain to have that. But if no one is around or you don't feel like being touched, you can try pressing your back into the corner where the walls are right behind you. Just press yourself into the corner, wrap your arms around yourself so that you can feel pressure all around your torso. We're wired to calm down when we're hugged. And that's it. You now have a whole bunch of things that you can do when you notice you're dysregulated. And at the end of this video, I'll give you a link to a download where it's all written down so you can keep those tips with you. Now, some people ask, is medication helpful for treating dysregulation? Some researchers have said yes, some say no, but given that we now know that the underlying problem with a lot of childhood PTSD symptoms, it's not a chemical imbalance per se, that's corrected by the introduction of chemicals. Rather, it's brain dysregulation. So there's evidence that some medications can actually do more harm than good. And one of the reasons may be that they interfere with our natural ability to re-regulate after a period of dysregulation. So if you think about it, everybody gets dysregulated sometimes, and everyone eventually re-regulates. With CPTSD, we tend to get dysregulated more often and for longer periods of time. So the goal is to learn to re-regulate as soon as you notice it and then to stay regulated more of the time. That's the first part of the solution. The second part, then, with your nice, fresh, regulated mind, is to work on the behaviors and circumstances that flowed out of you living your life dysregulated all this time. The childhood trauma happened, and you definitely were affected, but this is the stuff that holds you back now, the dysregulation and the self-defeating behaviors. So that's the essence of what I teach in my courses and coaching programs, my upcoming book, Learn to Re-Regulate Your Brain and Emotions, and I teach people how to do that. And while it's important to acknowledge what happened to you and get some support for that, the real work of healing is going to be the healing of life problems that are holding you back today. The trauma-driven habits, the behaviors, the reactions you have. Focus on right now and take steps to grow into being your real self, because you were made to be something much more than someone who struggles all the time. And we need you. If you can master re-regulation, you can then have all this space in your life and possibility. You can meet people, you can try things, you can quit things, you can make a positive difference in the world. That's where happiness comes from. And these all become choices when you learn to re-regulate. You can do what you love, you can choose what you want to spend time thinking about. It's a good way of life. Have you ever had the experience where you're doing great in life? You're connecting with people, you're enjoying your work, you're being productive, your home space is all clean and nice, and you think, I think I got this life thing figured out. And then, bam, something happens
that makes you feel rejected or angry or panicked. And instead of just being thrown off for 15 minutes or an hour, you go way off the tracks for days or more. And if you went through abuse and neglect as a kid, this is probably a phenomenon that you know really well. And when you're kind of offline for those days, getting things done can feel almost impossible. You know what you should do, like get to work on time, clean the kitchen, wish your friend a happy birthday, or just take a shower, but you just can't do it. And the ordinary word for this is procrastination. But for people with childhood PTSD, procrastinating can have some harsh overtones of depression and a feeling of paralysis and a dread of putting on your clothes and getting back out there again to do what you do best in the world. But here's the weird thing. It can also feel really comforting for a while, like a cozy cocoon, procrastination. And that's because for those of us who get easily triggered and overstimulated by doing things that challenge us, stepping up, putting ourselves out there, being vulnerable with another person, there can be a strong countervailing force that wants to just pull you back into the cocoon, just snug and safe, not triggered. But it's not safe, is it? Not at all. To avoid life. Everything good in your life, all the growth that you'll have as a person, depends on you spending some time regularly out in the world. Not all your time, but a balance between the time you spend striving for your dreams and connecting with people and being brave in the world on one hand, and then on the other hand, the quiet time that you need to collect yourself and get re-regulated, to re-regulate your brain and nervous system, which for most people with CPTSD can get very frazzled and dysregulated during your out time. So let's call it that. Out time and in time. And what throws it out of balance is how you bring it back to some middle place where you can be both courageous and take care of yourself and not have these long periods of spiritual torpor and self-sabotage that are so common for people with CPTSD and that hold you back from what you want. Okay, so let's talk this through because the solution lies in a combination of dealing with your dysregulation and then taking action. There it is, okay? Re-regulate, take action. That's where I'm going to take you with this talk. Now, if you're new to my channel and new to the concept of being dysregulated, this is the name for the disorienting phenomenon that happens to everyone sometimes, but it's especially common for people with CPTSD. And when it's happening, you might experience it as a feeling of discombobulation, numbness, being flustered, or not being able to stick with your thoughts long enough to remember what you were saying, or you walk into a room and you can't remember why you went in there. Have you ever done that? So dysregulation is often mistaken for ADHD. Sometimes it might be ADHD, sometimes it might just be CPTSD. With CPTSD, your attention when you're dysregulated can be just like a bag of cats. But so is your whole nervous system, and it can make you emotionally overreactive. So when that's happening, you lash out or you do things impulsively, or it can make you feel so overwhelmed that you want to just lay down in bed with Netflix and procrastinate. So sometimes, maybe it's a conscious choice to take a break, fine. But procrastination for us is often triggered by dysregulation. And we get so used to seeking comfort and quiet and low stimulation, niceness, softness, blankness, that we use inaction like a drug sometimes. And it can be like an addiction. And many of us are a lot more prone to other self-soothing but self-destructive behaviors when we're procrastinating, like binge eating or smoking weed all day or playing video games or fantasizing about someone who either isn't available or who doesn't even exist. So we check out. We're just gone. We're not here. And the trouble with that is, in life, people who aren't here don't get very far. You have to be present to win, as some people say. Now, our fantasy is often that in a minute or tomorrow we'll leap into action again. And it's sometimes true that you need some rest. But the fantasy of procrastination is that if you could just lie around avoiding your life long enough, your batteries will finally get recharged. And then what? It'll all be solved. I don't know. Inspiration will come back. Energy will come back. Confidence will come back. And you'll be able to do all those things that everyone's counting on you for. You'll be able to get ahead in life. And wanting all those things to happen is good. It's not stupid. It's right to want all those things, because this is what our lives are for, to rise up, to heal from what has happened so that we can become our real selves and bring to the world what we are capable of bringing. And that's the tragedy of CPTSD, is that gets blocked. There are good things that we were made to bring, and it feels terrible knowing that you're meant for more than where you are right now, but you can't quite act on it. And in my experience, this is the most haunting kind of depression. The thing I always want to procrastinate on, for example, is making these videos. Why? Because it's hard. It takes a lot of work coming up with something out of thin air. Like, this is like coming out of nowhere. And then fixing up my face and my hair, turning on all the lights and the equipment and saying it on camera like I am now. It's hard. And it's really, really risky. You guys might judge me or criticize me, and people do, they check out the comments sometime. We try to take the hateful comments out, and so mostly what you see is all the kind and beautiful comments that, the vast majority of people contribute here. But does all that love stop me from getting hurt by the haters? No. They criticize my hair, my opinions, or the opinions they mistakenly think that I have, that I don't. They call me dangerous, they call me ignorant. I had someone give me hell a couple weeks ago because they thought that the dimples in my chin were snake bite piercings. And they lectured me on how unprofessional it was for somebody in my position to have that, and that it was culturally hostile or something to native traditions, where that comes from. And they were just like, I don't even know where they get this. Even when the comments are stupid, it makes me want to give up, all right? That happens to everybody. It happens to me. There's a therapist in Indiana who spends, it must be hours, and it's been going on weeks and months, just like obsessed with trying to tell me that I have no right to teach my experience and my opinions here. And honestly, it feels like when people put me down, it totally dysregulates me. I'm human, just like everybody, and I have CPTSD. But what good will it do if I run from these triggers, if I let it stop me? Everything I do because I've learned to face what hurts me and to calm my triggers and get clarity in my mind about my purpose. Not the hateful therapist or the piercing bully person. What I'm trying to do, stepping forward into my small part and doing something good in the world, doing the best I can. You hear me, and in fact, your kind comments are hugely encouraging. And the encouragement that you give other people here is more powerful than you will ever know. It makes a huge difference for people. Sometimes one kind comment could change the course of someone's life. So you're really doing something when you do that. Now, if you say unkind things to people here, we can't catch it every time it happens, but just know bullies and haters are always going to be in our midst. It's just part of the world, and we don't have to let them win. And that means we don't have to let them silence us or hold us down. And so everything depends on learning to keep your brain and your nervous system regulated despite what anybody is doing. Because when you're regulated, you can think clearly. You can make decisions and act on those decisions. And that is everything. Thinking clearly, taking action, operating in your own best interest. Like, how many times has CPTSD taken that from you? That's what you can do. That's how you can heal from what happened to you and change your life. You cannot let the people who hurt you, now or in the past, stop you from becoming who you are. And you don't have to be perfect at this to get started. If you think you get dysregulated, there's a quiz down below where you can check your experiences against a list of common symptoms, by the way. That's right down there. There's also all my courses down there if you want to check those out. But I hear from so many of you out there who are not able to get out of an abusive situation, or who are not able to financially care for yourself and the people who count on you, or who are not able to show the world who you really are, because the risk involved in these things, from putting yourself out there and risking criticism and failure, feels like it'll be so dysregulated that you would disintegrate, that you'd just break down and never be okay again. And you might have been in that place before, or close to it. I have too, and it's terrifying. But there's a gentle path through that place and up and out of it. And it involves learning to identify when you're dysregulated and learning to get re-regulated again. And from a regulated place, your heart is beating at a nice rate, your breathing is calm and regular, your brain is humming along, and you're like attuned and aware of what you feel, what's going on around you, so that now you can take action in the loveliest sort of ways. Things get easier. You're on a level playing field with people who didn't get traumatized, who aren't dysregulated. I mean, you will get dysregulated again, we all will, but you'll know how to notice it and bring yourself back to a regulated and calm, attentive state. You'll be able to notice when you're hungry or tired or feeling like the person in front of you isn't really safe for you. Your red flag detector switches back on. You might get an impulse to lash out or smoke a cigarette, but you'll feel a more spacious set of choices in front of you when that happens, what you want to do about it. And you can choose to use your attention. This is my favorite. You can choose to use your attention the way that you want to use your attention. You can learn, you can listen carefully to someone who's opening up to you, you can have insight. Now, it's human nature to desire the easy path in any given moment, to crap out, lie down, avoid any trouble. But it's also human nature, it's like coded into us to want something more. It comes and gets me at like 3 in the morning sometimes when I've been procrastinating. I wake up just feeling agitated and guilty and demoralized. Do you ever have that? I want the comfort of avoiding things that are hard and triggering, but even more than that, I want the joy I get from trying, from putting myself out there. For me, it's going ahead and making the video, and that's how it was for me today. And yet here I am. I feel good. I get to post this video and then read all the wise and tender things that you will be saying in the comments. And it makes me feel useful and real. Now, do you have something that does that for you? Have you been avoiding it? Are you feeling ready to change that problem and start taking good, healthy actions that make you feel good? So even if you wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, worried that life is passing you by, you go to bed that night knowing that today you actually did what you needed to do. You lived your life. You worked on your healing. You contributed positive things. You moved in a good direction. This doesn't just require healing. It is healing. This is what it looks like. Those good actions in the right measure, taking action, pausing to re-regulate, then taking action again. It's how you climb out of the trauma ditch as many times as you need to. Because believe me, it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
When people feel hurt or threatened, a reaction rises up. It's emotional, it's physiological, and these things shape what they do and say and think in that moment. And it can lead to behaviors that they later regret. I call those self-defeating behaviors, and everybody has some. But if you had trauma when you were a kid, your nervous system may have gone through some changes that mean your reactions are extra large, and therefore your self-defeating behaviors can overwhelm your life. So this is a big reason why having childhood PTSD is a problem in present time and not just the past. So I want to unpack the sequence that happens, that takes you from something that happens to an emotional reaction to a behavior. And you're going to find that you have a reaction pattern that can drive you, before you even realize it, into self-sabotaging behaviors that have maybe cost you relationships with people you loved and opportunities that you wanted. And those behaviors may even have drained your sense of dignity and self-esteem. So I'll talk about common self-defeating behaviors in a minute, but I want to bring your attention to what your pattern is. Most people have a pattern, and once you see it, it's a lot easier to change. So let's take this process. Something happens, your reaction pattern kicks in, and out comes the behavior, right? So step by step, the process starts with a trigger, way over here, a trigger. And when I say trigger, I don't mean the conventional social media use of the word trigger, where it means that something made you angry or upset. When I say trigger, I mean a stimulus that happens within you or outside of you that sets off neurological dysregulation. And if you're new to my work, what I want you to know is that abuse and neglect in childhood can cause changes in your nervous system that disrupt parts of your body, your physical functioning, your thinking, your emotions, because those are all governed by your nervous system. And trauma can make them glitch a little bit. That's known as dysregulation. Everybody gets dysregulated a little bit, but people who were traumatized as kids are dysregulated more deeply and more of the time and can have a harder time coming back from it. Now, never fear, you can learn to notice dysregulation and quickly learn to re-regulate. So a trigger sets off dysregulation, and when you're dysregulated, the gates open for this oversized reaction, and that's where the trouble gets in. Now, just for the record, triggers are going to happen. Some can be avoided, like you can stay away from fireworks on holidays, for example, or you can not date people who yell. But when you can't avoid the trigger, let's say feeling criticized at times or left out, you can focus on calming the reaction that you have to that trigger. And when you learn to do that, the triggering event that you can't control becomes more manageable for you too. So let me show you an example of the trigger reaction behavior sequence. Now again, most self-defeating behaviors begin with a trigger followed by a dysregulated reaction that then leads to the behavior. So let's say you go on a first date and the person says they'll call you to plan your second date. But after many days, they haven't called, which for many people is a trigger. And you become terrified that you did something awful to push them away, and that fear is a reaction to the trigger. And then you text them 3 times a day for the next 2 weeks, and that's a self-defeating behavior. So you see what I mean? Trigger, reaction, behavior. So when it comes to self-defeating behaviors, most of them fall into 3 major groups, or what I call reaction patterns. And the patterns drive the behavior. The patterns include the urge to cling, the urge to control, and the urge to escape. And one of these patterns is usually dominant in each person, but most of us slip into our non-dominant pattern from time to time. And your pattern shows up when you're triggered. And if you don't yet have much healing, it can prompt your particular self-defeating behaviors. Like we all have some favorites. So if you were never triggered, your reaction pattern would be dormant. Isn't that cool? Like if you never got triggered, if you could never get triggered, the reaction wouldn't happen, the behavior would be unlikely to come out, or it wouldn't pressure you so bad to do those things you don't want to do that sabotage you. But getting triggered is bound to happen sometimes. Remember, the reaction to the trigger is usually emotional. And for people with childhood PTSD, that can mean dysregulated emotions that come out way larger than normal. And you can teach yourself to notice these reactions, the patterns that you have that tend to cause problems, and make a conscious effort to catch them before you act on them. So what are the emotions that throw us into this loop? The 3 big culprits are overwhelm, fear, and loneliness. Now there are others, including anger, jealousy, brokenheartedness, that can certainly prompt self-defeating behaviors. But just to keep this simple, I'm lumping all reactive emotions into just those 3 categories. So each of those core emotions, overwhelm, fear, loneliness, tend to go hand in hand with certain reactions. Overwhelm can prompt you to want to escape. I'm overwhelmed, I gotta go. Fear can prompt you to want to control. It's out of control, I want to get it under control. Loneliness can prompt you, quite logically, to cling. And those are reaction patterns. You may notice that these reaction patterns are similar to the 4 widely recognized trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. These also refer to people's basic behavior patterns, reaction patterns when they perceive a threat. And they can be especially strong in traumatized people. I focus on escape, control, and cling because they're more specific drivers of self-defeating behaviors, and they're interpersonal. Now, you probably have a pattern, and I'll help you identify that, the behaviors and the reactions that come out when you're triggered. To make positive changes in your life, working on how you react while triggered is the most powerful thing you can do. When you can better manage your reactions, you'll have more control over what happens next. Instead of messing things up and creating more problems in your life, you have less of that. You can have more room in your life to make positive improvements. And when your life is going better, you won't be as triggered. And the positive upward cycle of healing continues. So let's look at the 3 patterns one by one. So first, the urge to escape. And this is akin to the flight response. Something triggering happens, and you get a strong urge to get away. It's often triggered by feeling overwhelmed, and here's how it can go wrong. So let's say you have an argument with your partner, which is a trigger, and they raise your voice at you. Not abusively, but it's emotional for them and for you. So there you go, reaction comes. Your mind races, and you're flooded with emotions so intense that you can hardly bear it. That's a reaction. You flip into escape mode then, and you are convinced that at all costs, even if you ruin your relationship, you must get out of your relationship right now. Have you ever had that feeling, that very strong feeling like, I don't care, I'm leaving? It's common. It's a normal reaction in traumatized people, but it's a self-defeating behavior that does a lot of harm to relationships. What you really needed was to make the unbearable feelings smaller and more manageable, but it's hard to see that when you're in the middle of dysregulation and overwhelm. And in this state, you might say hurtful things, announce you're leaving your relationship, and not come to until you've packed your bags, or you've threatened to never return, or you've driven 30 miles away. The reaction does eventually come back down again, and as you gradually return to regular awareness, just the regret, the remorse for your behavior kicks in. Have you had that part too? And you fear that you've now ruined your relationship. So here's what you can do instead. When you keep in mind that when you're thinking of fleeing the relationship, it means that you're triggered, and you accept that. And in a trauma-driven reaction, probably overwhelm, and you can take a time out to use your re-regulation tools to bring that back down. This is no time to make big decisions and no time to announce the end of a relationship or that you're leaving or anything like that. Maybe you need to leave, maybe you don't. But if you're not in danger, you can wait until you're re-regulated and out of the state of overwhelm in order to make a decision. Most things can wait until tomorrow. Now, it may require new boundaries to give yourself a pause when you're triggered, and good communication with your partner so that you can agree that when either of you is having a trauma-driven reaction, you or they can call a timeout to get re-regulated. Now, this is powerful medicine for relationships and can help you avoid acting out with a self-defeating behavior. Remember, if you ever think that you need to leave your relationship, assuming you're in no danger, you can always postpone the decision by a day and see if your feelings are different. If you're prone to trauma-driven reactions, they almost certainly will be different a day later. Now, here are some self-defeating behaviors that often go along with the urge to escape. Lack of self-care, not dealing with your physical needs, taking care of your teeth, bathing, eating properly. Procrastination, addictive use of substances or food or TV or the internet. Going into debt over impulsive purchases, blaming other people for everything that's wrong with your life. Rage, yelling, anger. These sometimes reflect the urge to control other people, but raging can also be a way to dissociate from feelings of fear and overwhelm. Sometimes anger feels like a step up from being terribly depressed. Also, another sign is fantasy, including dreams of becoming rich and famous, romantic obsession, limerence, which is an addictive obsession for someone that you can't have, avoidance, fleeing relationships, or taking space when things get hard, but not working to mend the problem underneath, refusing to make plans or promises for the future with people who are counting on you. There's also mini avoidance, which includes not returning calls and texts promptly or flaking out on plans. Now let's talk about another reaction pattern, and let's talk about control. The urge to control people, to make other people do what you want so that you can feel okay, is based on the belief that this is the only way for you to get emotional relief. And I think we all do that a little bit sometimes. It's similar to the fight response, and it's often triggered by fear. Now, here's how it can go wrong. Let's say you have an argument about your best friend's plan to go away for the weekend with some friends, and the friends that she's visiting didn't invite you, which is a trigger, right? You feel left out. You fear that the reason is because they don't like you. That's your reaction. Nobody likes me. See, I never get liked. You also fear that your friend doesn't think that you're worthy of her friendship, and she's been making positive changes in her life, and you fear you can't keep up with her. She never told you any of this, and you're embarrassed to express your fears. You find yourself saying derogatory things about her other friends, and that's something that we do sometimes when we feel threatened, and that angers her. And this in turn prompts an intense emotional reaction in you. You blurt out that if she goes to spend time with them, that you'll lose respect for her. Well, that's a self-defeating behavior. She goes anyway, and while she's gone, you become terrified that you've ruined the friendship. And then you text an apology, and then she doesn't reply. Now, what happened there? Your fears that your friend had outgrown you and would abandon you prompted you to try to jealously and maybe passive-aggressively hurt her relationships with other friends. And you hoped that you could control your fear by controlling her behavior and her feelings, which of course was bound to fail and backfire. And your fear became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now maybe the friendship is slipping away from you. But here's what you can do instead. When you can notice your trigger, in this case, not being included, you can bring all your focus to your reaction, remembering that this trigger tends to bring up fears of abandonment and unworthiness, and your past attempts to try to manipulate and control people to stop them from leaving you have never worked. So you keep that in mind. You remind yourself that when you're afraid of abandonment, your best course of action is to pause. Just take a break. Use your daily practice and emergency tools to calm the reaction. So you use your tools to calm your reaction, and then you allow your friend to make her own choices. That's how friendship works. When you connect with her again, you can show genuine friendliness. And in fact, your friend never has to know that you had a strong negative reaction. You could talk about it, but you can do it later when you're not so dysregulated. Now, if your reaction pattern is to control, here are some self-defeating behaviors that you also might have noticed in yourself. People with that control urge also are prone to black and white thinking, like either you're with me or you're against me. Either you go to the camping trip with your friends or the friendship's over. You're trying to force someone to go to therapy or substance abuse treatment. That's a control thing. Codependency is control, which in essence is trying to make someone change because of your belief that if they would change, you could be happy. Another control thing is setting excessive boundaries that are really rules meant to dictate what other people can say or do, and then demanding that people comply with them. And that's not a boundary, that's control. A boundary is something that you will step away from. Another control behavior is like threats, like threatening that that's it, the relationship is over, I'm leaving, which is emotional abuse. And it can even escalate into physical abuse. And that's certainly physical abuse is a control thing. Making a scene in public or having emotional meltdowns when you don't get what you want, that basically blackmails the person to comply so that they can stay safe and not be part of the scene. Fudging the truth or outright lying so you can control what your partner knows and avoid dealing with the consequences of them knowing the truth. Now let's look at the reaction pattern of clinging. The urge to cling to people, to hold onto them at all costs, stems from a belief that any amount of misery is worth it to avoid being alone and facing the feelings that arise when relationships end. And that's like a prison for a lot of us, especially if you have abandonment wounds. You'll put up with anything not to have to face that feeling. It's associated with the fawn response, the cling, the urge to cling. And though it looks the least harmful, it is the most soul-sucking trauma-driven reaction of them all. So let's say you've fallen in love with somebody, a guy you've been hanging out with as friends for a month or so, and you don't want to push it, but you believe that he will eventually say something to make it clear that yes, you are dating. And then one day he casually mentions he's seeing someone. Trigger, sets off dysregulation, right? You're devastated. And it's as if your whole world just died. You've been waiting for a long time for him to sort of validate what you hoped for. And now you're ashamed that you ever thought that he was into you. And here we are. We're in reaction land now. Trigger, reaction. So you push down your feelings. You smile. You pretend to be happy for him. And he then asks you if you mind if he brings his girlfriend to the movie that the two of you were planning to see that night. And instead of canceling the plan or telling him that you feel misled and hurt, You pretend you're looking forward to meeting her and go to the movies with them, which is a self-defeating behavior that we call being cool girl. You feel that leaving or saying something will only ruin the friendship with him, and anything is better than that for you when you have that kind of emotional pain that you're afraid of being left. You feel that going to the movie is better than being alone. So here's what you can do instead. Because you know this trigger, rejection, is hard for you, and in the past has driven you to abandon yourself, lying about your feelings, and playing a role that brings you more pain and humiliation just to save the friendship. The thought of leaving this relationship sounds unbearable to you, so you can remind yourself that pretending to be just friends has always kept you alone and sad. Non-reciprocal friendships take up the space where a partner or friends could be, so it guarantees that you'll stay alone and sad. During alone time, you can practice doing things that give you joy so that the failure of any one relationship really can't ruin your life. You can also take steps to make new friends with an explicit aim to be yourself with them. Be yourself and see how it goes. You may need to remind yourself every day that hiding who you are and how you feel has never made you happy. And the only people who will ever really know and love you are the ones who love the real you. So how do you know if your reaction pattern is clinging? Here are some signs. You stay in bad relationships where you're mistreated or you're just miserable. You stay in a terrible job where you're not fulfilled and you're not earning the money that you could if you changed jobs. You pretend to be a friend when you are in love with someone just to keep the relationship going. You pretend that you're cool with staying friends with an ex or with being one of several sex partners of theirs when what you want is to be with them monogamously. Holding on to a fantasy that someone will one day come around and reciprocate your feelings, but you avoid actually talking to them about this, usually because you already know they would not reciprocate and your intense feelings would make them uncomfortable, so you stay silent. You go along with whatever scenario you think will preserve a relationship, and then suddenly you flip and you hurt people, believing that they owe you more than they've given because you gave them so much. Now, this is the clinging pattern, and healing from it, just like all the other ones, is a step-by-step process of building up the capacity to handle your emotions. And I know this doesn't come naturally to those of us who were traumatized as kids, but you can build it up like a muscle so that when triggers happen, and they will happen, you have space between how you feel and what you do. And this can make all the difference in your life. So I got really emotionally trashed the other day. It was horrible. I had this bad yelling conversation with a vendor who I hired to perform some professional services for my company. And I got completely dysregulated over it. So this is now like 7 days ago. And you've heard me talk about productivity crashes and how, you could lose 3 days of work over something upsetting you. Well, it's been a week for me, and I feel like I should still be over it right now, but I'm only now climbing out of my reaction to my horrible day because I really do have CPTSD, and I also have some healing. So I want to tell you what I've been doing to climb back out of deep dysregulation and turn my horrible day into now finally a good day. It's a series of actions I take when I get really overwhelmed, which happens, so that I can get back to feeling alert and peaceful and focused and friendly. Got to be friendly. So that's really important. Feeling irritable isn't going to work in the job that I do as crappy childhood fairy. I need to be in a pretty good place to turn on the camera and make these videos or do group coaching calls. A lot of the stuff I do, it's really interactive, so I need to be in a good place. Getting dysregulated will cost me the ability to do what I love and to do this job. So it's really important for me to stay regulated. So I'm going to try to resist getting into the story of what happened. It's very tempting to tell you all the dirty details, but getting into the story is one of the things that dysregulates me. So just to give you a sense, I paid a lot of money. I didn't get what I expected, and I felt ripped off. And I felt like I was getting gaslighted about what was promised versus what was given when I, kind of confronted the situation. So I think I could have pulled away easier sooner, but there was this pretty good chunk of money involved, and I couldn't get it back. So I felt like I had to keep pushing to work it out. And I saw this coming for several months. Like, stuff was bothering me. The problems were beginning to show up. But, I told myself, it'll get better. It's probably just me. I'm just being paranoid, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes I really do make a mountain out of a molehill, so I do have to watch for that. It wasn't crazy to try to check that suspicion that I was being manipulated, right? Not crazy to check it, but I would have been okay if I had found out, like, no, I was just overreacting. Well, I was. Whenever I questioned what was happening, the vendor would say a whole bunch of like words, and it would have a big put down in it. And they would say, oh, you're just a complainer. No one else has ever found fault with my work. And, stuff like that, like when you think about it, it couldn't really be true. So I would just feel awful. I would just feel like really small every time we tried to talk about the project and problems that were happening in it and try to resolve them, like in good faith. So I hung in there, and basically until I kind of blew. I just blew. So that right there, raising my voice at someone, never feels good. And yes, everything was dodgy, and yes, they were putting me down, and yes, they were kind of BSing me about my concerns, and that's a bad feeling. But yelling at someone is even worse for me. I mean, if I were like in a situation where I was getting mugged or something, yes, I'd yell. But just like trying to transact business or have a cooperative, conversation with somebody, if I'm raising my voice, I'm basically losing control of my self-regulation. So if anything is going to push me into a dysregulated 3-day or more productivity crash, it's being ashamed of how I acted. And that's what happened. So this is what I do when I'm in that dysregulation ditch like that. And it works. It really helps to get that horrible pain and dread out of my mind and to start feeling like I'm here, I'm good, and I'm going to keep going. So number one, I talked about it. I talked for like 10 minutes, and my husband will probably tell you that I talked for much longer than that, and he might be right. It felt like 10 minutes to me. I went and found him after I got off this terrible phone call. He was like looking really stressed. His eyes were really big. He had overheard my side of the conversation, and he was really worried like what was going on, what were going to be the consequences of what he could tell was a total like breakdown of the professional relationship. So I filled up with fear that he was going to think that I'm the problem. He wouldn't back me up. He wouldn't believe me. And of course, I felt like I had to explain, my side of the story. But here's the thing. He's like most people, and someone, ranting about something they're angry about is really uncomfortable. And I know that about him. And I was able to finally get out of the story and just feel the hurt and anger and shame that I was feeling. And then I did the second thing. It wasn't planned, but I just started to cry. And there was a time in my life when I used to cry every day, but now it's kind of rare for me to have a big cry. And I gotta say, it feels so good. I just stopped talking about it, and I sat with my husband, and he hung out with me for a while I just cried, and I couldn't stop. I'd stop, and then I'd start again, and I was just sobbing. It was just like there was so much built up. And he was saying, nice things like, it'll be okay, you'll figure this out, we can just let it go and put all this behind us. And he didn't at all jump on the bandwagon of, venting with me like, yeah, because I was like, and then this happened, and then this happened. He didn't jump on. He just was like attending to my emotional state. That's pretty genius of him. It helped me to come back down. Because of my CPTSD, when I feel that bad, I need to shift gears. It doesn't feel good for me. I'll kind of like amp myself up if I'm like really upset about something. So this is the third thing. I stopped venting. I stopped talking about it, even though when you're doing it, it feels like it's helping. It feels like, it's helping, and it'll help all the way if I could just like keep talking, but that's not really how it works for me. And you might feel the same way. It just ratchets up the negative emotions. Some talking is necessary, but like to go on and on, not good. And I know that flies in the face of a lot of what, you were taught, what I was taught, but talking is not the only way to turn around a terrible experience or to, stop feeling so bad about it. Talking is usually part of it, but when you're quiet, this whole new depth of feeling can happen when you get off that like spinning wheel of the story, what happened, what they did, and then I did this, and then they did that. The story is mesmerizing. It builds. And when you switch gears out of the talking, it can give you that pause that lets you come back into your body, back into the present moment, back into calm or calmer. And it's a lot easier on other people when you're in a calm, kind of sad or angry state than when you're, in a very intense, like your voice is shrill, it's up there, you're loud, and you're trying to escape the feeling with a lot of, noise and fire, right? So just bring it down by not talking about it, just being with it for a minute. You can try that. The fourth thing was I had some tea and some food. And basically, anytime someone yells at me, I'm going to get dissociated for a little bit, really out of myself. And I'm definitely not going to get any creative or high intellectual work done when I'm in that state. I need to come back down first. So I might as well just accept this is where we are, stop the project underway and have some tea. And if nothing else, just like the tactile experience of tea, holding the cup. Look what I have. The Krabby Childhood Fairy Cup. I can have that, and it's, it's actually warm in here. I have tea in here. And you have this sensation of the tea, and it brings you back out of the bad dream that you're sort of projecting into and back into your body, back into real time. And, many of you have heard me say, you're never really out of your body. It's a metaphor for being kind of dissociated, just not present, not able to feel yourself. So that's what everything feels like for me when I'm really dysregulated anyway. The fifth thing is I write, and I write my fears and resentments. I teach that in my daily practice course that I'm always talking about. Forgive me, but I just have to. This is the main technique that I use, to be okay every day and to re-regulate, to basically, over 28 years, I've taught myself to sort of get regulated and stay regulated. I still get dysregulated, but I know how to come back pretty quick. So it's a really nice practice to have. I've taught it to now hundreds of thousands of people. If you want to learn it, it's always down in the description section. It's on the free tools page of my website, and I think it's a standalone link down in the description section. So it's a specific technique to get the fearful and resentful thoughts out of your head and onto paper so that you can release them. There's so many levels that it's helpful on. For one thing, you're expressing yourself, but writing is tactile, and it's a way that you can express those emotions without re-traumatizing yourself by verbal venting. That's not always what you need. For a lot of traumatized people, talking about hard things is really triggering. It will re-trigger the trauma. But we do need to express ourselves, and if I want to, I can always read what I wrote or talk to a friend who I trust who also does these techniques. I can do that later. But in the moment, just writing starts to let that toxic air just out of my mind. And when you can put fear and resentment out of your head onto paper, you can give your mind a little vacation. And these negative feelings, they can't control you like that when you're ventilated like that. And they otherwise would have. I've spent a lot of my life before I learned these techniques just throttled by my negative, my fearful, my resentful thoughts. So that's what resentment's like. Your mind is locked. So the next thing I do, and I never feel like it when I'm upset, but I go outside. I move around a little bit. I take a walk. I pull some weeds. If it's daytime, getting out into sunlight really helps come back into present time. I walk. I don't talk or I don't listen to anything when I'm on a sort of therapeutic re-regulating walk. I look at the plants. I look at the houses. I look at the cars. I smell the air, and no matter what my mind is thinking, my nervous system is just straightening itself out. It's just kind of aligning with reality out there, and that feels good. Our nervous systems love to use the senses to see what time of day is it? Where am I? Which way is up? Your nervous system loves that. It loves to feel the weight of your body when you walk or sit. It likes to use proprioception, feeling yourself in space, and sometimes to help me feel myself in time, I remind myself, what day is it? I say the date out loud to myself. Just walking around the neighborhood, chatting away to myself. Well, not very much. Because when you're in a bad, dysregulated state, you don't know what time it is, do you? Time just starts flying away. It's a big blur. You're in no man's land. So there are all these good things to come back into present time, into your body and out of the,
torrent of thoughts and feelings that are just flooding you. But they're now a memory, right? They're not a current danger. It's not a threat. So present time, safe. When I can, and this is number 8, I get back to work. And sometimes I can only do some no-brainer tasks for a day or two. There's always a lot of no-brainer work for me to do. But after a couple days, I start getting anxious about not getting through the real work, which for me is making videos. So it took me, at least 4 days of doing no-brainer stuff, filing, making lists, copying lists onto some sort of digital thing. I didn't need to cry about it anymore, but I limited how much I talked about this thing that happened that, I'm still like really unhappy that it happened, but it's coming down. The level of upset is coming down. I just stopped talking about it. I ate good food. I made sure to get protein in every meal. That's very grounding. And my meditation, man, when I'm dysregulated like that, it gets pretty wobbly. It's hard for me to, just even do the time. I'm sitting down, I'm looking at my watch, I'm fidgeting and everything. But I do it anyway. And I made sure to get a little exercise and, keep going outside when I could. And when I started working on videos again, at first, to help myself do it, I use a timer. So I set a timer for these 25-minute increments, and I make myself just work on one thing at a time. So if I finish it inside the 25 minutes, I go right to the next thing. I have a list of things I'm going to go through, and I just do them one thing at a time for 25 minutes. Then I take a break, then I do it again. So that's a method called Pomodoros. If you're interested, you should Google that, Pomodoros. It's a lovely technique. Often if I am blocked and I just can't really get started on anything, one Pomodoro and I'm just like off. I can just keep working for hours. It's nice. But when you're doing it, no checking email, no phone notifications, no cups of tea. You just do one thing for 25 minutes. And I have like little Post-its I put on my door to say I'm doing a Pomodoro. And so my family knows to kind of just let me be for a little bit. And I'll come out and talk to everybody during my break. And focusing deeply on my work, it feels therapeutic to me. It helps me. Another thing I did after this upset, it had been like 3 days. I went to a 12-step meeting and I didn't speak there, but it was really good to sit with other people, especially after all the meetings, for a couple years were only online. It was like, this is one of my first few like face-to-face meetings. And it was so nice. I was just like listening to people, hanging out, really paying attention, and just really getting uplifted by them talking about their recovery. That's a really positive thing. And then I used a tool that happens to be very healing for me. I made a list. I like lists. I'm a list person. When I was ready, I thought through the, steps that I wanted to take to get a new vendor and close up the agreement with the former vendor. And at some point, I might apologize. I'm certainly willing to the vendor, who I had the blow up with. I don't know yet. So far right now, I'm not clear if I need to do that. And, but I'm going to be open to it. I always, I use my daily practice to surface. Like if I see what I need to apologize for, the minute I see it, I will do it. So I feel okay about how I'm interacting right now. And it has, we're peacefully, working through some completion, of the project. So the blow up that happened, and this is kind of normal for me, it kicked up a lot of old hurts. And it's tempting when I'm in that hurt place to really dwell on a whole variety of bad things. I can just get very negative and sad and boring. And one strategy that's underrated is just catching yourself when you can and just not going there. So I make myself, if I notice, I just start going, oh yes, and then there was that time, when everyone turned against me. My favorite old bad memory. I have a few, that I just gravitate to when I'm sort of in a low state, when I'm worn down. I'll just sort of gravitate to these unpleasant memories. They're not going on now. Everything that can be done has been done, but they're just kind of like a magnet for my negative thinking. So if I go there and I'm consciously working to try to get re-regulated and back in the saddle, if I catch myself thinking about those sad stories, I just make myself think about something else. And it's weird because I think there's kind of this zeitgeist where people go, oh, you should never do that. It's like, you totally should do that sometimes. There is definitely a time and place to just like
think about something else. And so I have kind of some happy memories that I like to think about. And I have a new one that I added to my collection. And it was when I was on vacation last month and my sons and I were swimming in the ocean together. And it's just like this really happy memory. We're swimming in the ocean. You know how when you're in salt water, it's really easy to float. And we were talking and floating. And I just had this moment where I was like, gosh, I'm so grateful for these guys, these kids. They're not kids, they're men. I'm just so grateful they came to be my babies. Just really grateful about it and proud of them. And I love them. And I always feel really at ease with them, like we really get along. So that's just a good feeling that I remind myself to visit. Why not? I sure have done that with negative memories. So dwelling on the good memories is positive. So number 9, this is the last one. This is my secret power tool for feeling better. If you really want to have a good day, find something kind that you can do for somebody else. And then if you really want to double down on it, do something kind for people where they don't know that you did it. If they find out, then in this game, you forfeit, you don't get any points. And if that happens, you have to find another secret good thing to do. And the reason I say this is because if there's any chance that you're going to be thought of as a good person, it's kind of tempting to do it for that reason. And it can pollute the benefits that you're going to get from just doing a kindness for someone. So the reason you're doing this, just to be honest with yourself, it's for your own happiness. And if it helps someone else, hooray, you just did something even better. So here are some ideas that you can do. You can call somebody who you know is having a hard time. You can put your neighbor's empty trash cans back in their driveway after the trucks come. Or you can put some coins in someone's parking meter if it's expired. That's an easy thing to do. This was one of my favorite ones. I've done it. I've had it done for me by strangers. And ever since the pandemic, we don't have toll takers on the Golden Gate Bridge. But what people used to do here in San Francisco is strangers would occasionally just pay their own bridge toll and the toll for the person behind them. And so you'd get up there with your money out and they go, no, this person already paid it for you. So it's true, it's not anonymous. Anyway, now it's all done like digitally and with cameras, and it's kind of like we have to find a new way to do a secret little good deed for people. So we're thinking about it. If you can't afford to pay somebody's bridge toll or parking meter, you can always give them a kind word. You can just say, I really appreciate you. You can compliment them. You can say something that's true and be real with them. And sometimes that makes you very vulnerable. But it's important that it's something they really deserve, because that's also lifting you out of everything's so terrible to, gosh, you know what, this person who is in my life or has crossed my path, like they're meritorious. I see it. They've done something good, and I appreciate that. And it's always good for us to be exposed to other people's virtues. When we see them accomplish something, be a good person, it uplifts us naturally. So you can always just pay a compliment, you can acknowledge them, and just give that to them as a gift. When you do that, you become an agent. You become more than yourself. You become an agent of good. You're working in the service of the good, which is really what you're made for. It's not just to eat food, go to sleep, watch TV, keep thinking of something else to do. You're made to be in the service of good. If nothing else, doing this, allowing this to be a big part of your life, it keeps you busy, keeps your mind off your problems. Everybody has problems, they never stop, but it's more than that. You're actually taking a little suffering out of the world. And someone once made you suffer, but now, instead of passing suffering on, you're taking suffering off of somebody. You're reducing it for them, expecting nothing back. It's not manipulation, it's not codependent, and it's not selfish. You're just shifting gears. You're changing how you see this and what's your role in the world. Getting out of suffering and into a cloud of kindness. And you turn around one day and you're going to realize that now you're having a good day. And that's how to turn a bad day into a good day. It might take some days, but it will work if you just keep putting one foot in front of the other.